The desert heat pressed down like a heavy blanket as Staff Sergeant Marcus Rivera adjusted his rifle scope for the third time that morning. His team of 4 Navy SEALs had been tracking a high-value target through the mountains of Afghanistan for 6 days. Intelligence reports suggested that Ahmed Hassan, a bomb maker responsible for attacks on coalition forces, was hiding in a remote compound just 15 miles from their current position. Rivera wiped the sweat from his forehead and checked his watch. The mission had started smoothly enough. They had inserted via helicopter under cover of darkness, landing in a valley that provided good concealment from enemy scouts. The terrain was brutal, rocky hills covered with loose stones that could give away their position with one wrong step. Every movement required careful planning. The team consisted of Rivera as the team leader, Petty Officer Jake Thompson as the communications specialist, Chief Petty Officer Sarah Chen as the medic, and Seaman Rodriguez as their explosives expert. They had worked together for 2 years and trusted each other completely. This trust would prove crucial in the coming hours. As they moved through the mountain passes, Rodriguez spotted movement through his binoculars. 3 figures were making their way along a ridge about 800 meters away. Rivera called for a halt and the team took cover behind a cluster of large rocks. Through his scope, Rivera could see that the figures were armed and appeared to be conducting reconnaissance. Chen whispered into her radio, reporting their position to headquarters. The response came back quickly. Intelligence had picked up increased radio chatter in the area. Enemy forces knew Americans were in the region and were actively searching for them. The mission parameters had just changed from a simple tracking operation to a potential combat situation. Thompson studied his map carefully. They were in a valley with steep walls on both sides, creating a natural corridor that enemy forces could use to trap them. The nearest extraction point was 12 miles away through difficult terrain. Rivera made the decision to continue toward the target compound, but with increased caution. As they moved forward, Rodriguez noticed something that made his blood run cold. Fresh footprints in the sandy soil showed that a large group had passed through the area recently. The prints were moving in the same direction as the SEAL team. Someone was following them, and they had been doing so for quite some time. Rivera gathered his team for a quick conference. The situation was becoming more dangerous by the hour. They could abort the mission and call for extraction, but Hassan might escape if they waited. Intelligence suggested he was planning to move to a new location within the next 24 hours. This might be their only chance to capture him. The team voted unanimously to continue the mission. They had trained for situations exactly like this one. Each member checked their equipment carefully: ammunition, medical supplies, communications gear, and emergency flares. Everything needed to be ready for whatever lay ahead. As the sun began to set, painting the mountains in shades of orange and red, the team reached a position where they could observe the target compound. Through their scopes, they could see guards posted at various points around the building. Lights were on inside, suggesting their target was present. But Rivera felt uneasy. Something about the setup didn't feel right. The guards seemed too relaxed, too obvious. In his experience, when something felt wrong, it usually was wrong. He decided they would wait until dawn before making any moves toward the compound. During the night watch, Thompson picked up radio transmissions that confirmed Rivera's suspicions. Enemy forces were not just aware of their presence. They were planning something. The compound was being used as bait to draw the American team into a carefully prepared trap. Dawn broke with an eerie silence that made every member of the team nervous. Rivera had barely slept, spending most of the night studying the compound through night vision equipment. What he saw confirmed his worst fears. The guards had changed positions several times during the night, but always in patterns that suggested they were herding the SEAL team toward a specific approach route. Chen was monitoring enemy radio frequencies when she heard something that made her grab Rivera's arm. The transmissions were in a local dialect, but she understood enough to know they were in serious trouble. At least 20 enemy fighters were positioned in the hills around their location. The compound was definitely a trap, and the net was closing around them. Rodriguez checked their ammunition supplies while Thompson worked on establishing communication with headquarters. The radio signals were being jammed intermittently, making contact difficult. When they finally got through, the news was not encouraging. The nearest friendly forces were more than 50 miles away, and helicopter extraction would not be possible until the following evening due to weather conditions moving into the area. Rivera made a difficult decision. They would have to fight their way out. The original mission to capture Hassan would have to be abandoned in favor of survival. But first, they needed to determine exactly where the enemy forces were positioned and find a route that would give them the best chance of escape. Using hand signals, Rivera split the team into two pairs. He and Chen would move to higher ground to get a better view of enemy positions, while Thompson and Rodriguez would prepare defensive positions and plan potential escape routes. They would maintain radio contact using short, coded bursts to avoid detection. As Rivera and Chen climbed toward a rocky outcrop that would give them a commanding view of the area, they moved carefully to avoid disturbing loose stones. Every sound seemed amplified in the morning air. Chen carried her medical pack and a sniper rifle, while Rivera had his assault rifle and the team's emergency equipment. From their new position, the scope of the trap became clear. Enemy fighters were positioned in a horseshoe formation around the valley, with heavy weapons covering all the obvious escape routes. Rivera counted at least 15 confirmed positions with probably more fighters hidden from view. The enemy had planned this carefully, using the terrain to their advantage. Through his binoculars, Rivera spotted something that made his stomach drop. A technical vehicle mounted with a heavy machine gun was positioned on the ridge opposite their location. The crew was scanning the valley systematically, searching for any sign of the American team. If they were spotted, that weapon could pin them down while other enemy forces moved in for the kill. Chen was studying the compound when she noticed unusual activity. Several vehicles had arrived during the night and men were moving equipment inside. It looked like the enemy was preparing for a major operation, possibly using the compound as a staging area for attacks on coalition forces. This intelligence would be valuable if they could somehow get it back to headquarters. Rivera knew they had two choices: try to sneak out of the valley under cover of darkness, or create a diversion that would allow them to escape in the confusion. Both options carried serious risks. Sneaking out would take many hours and required staying hidden from multiple enemy positions. Creating a diversion would reveal their location, but might give them a chance to fight their way to safety. Thompson's voice crackled over the radio with urgent news. He had intercepted communications indicating that the enemy knew approximately where the SEAL team was located. Search teams were being organized to sweep the valley systematically. They had maybe 2 hours before being discovered. The situation was getting desperate. Rivera looked at Chen and saw his own thoughts reflected in her eyes. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and surrounded. But they were Navy SEALs, trained for exactly these impossible situations. If they were going to die in this valley, they would take as many enemies with them as possible. Rivera began formulating a plan that was risky, but might work. They would use their emergency flares to create confusion and mark targets for any available air support. The flares would also serve as a signal to alert rescue forces to their exact location. It was a desperate gamble, but desperation was all they had left. Rivera and Chen made their way back to Thompson and Rodriguez, moving carefully through the rocks and scrub brush. Every shadow could hide an enemy fighter, and every sound could give away their position. The morning sun was climbing higher, making concealment more difficult with each passing minute. When they reached the defensive position, Rivera quickly briefed the team on what they had observed. The situation was worse than anyone had imagined. Not only were they surrounded, but enemy reinforcements were arriving throughout the morning. Radio intercepts suggested that a major insurgent leader was coordinating the operation personally, determined to eliminate the American Special Forces team. Rodriguez had been busy preparing charges that could be used to create diversions or clear obstacles. His demolitions training had taught him to be creative with limited resources. Using materials from their packs and natural features of the terrain, he had created several small explosive devices that could be triggered remotely. Thompson continued monitoring radio frequencies while working to re-establish contact with headquarters. The jamming was becoming more sophisticated, suggesting that the enemy had brought in specialized equipment. When he finally managed to get through, headquarters confirmed that no immediate support was available. Weather was closing in faster than expected, grounding all aircraft for at least 18 hours. Chen checked her medical supplies and prepared for casualties. In a firefight against these odds, someone was going to get hurt. She organized her equipment for quick access and reviewed procedures for treating gunshot wounds under combat conditions. Her training as both a medic and a combat operator would be tested to the limits. The team spent precious time planning their escape route. The valley offered several possible directions, but each had significant disadvantages. The northern route led through open ground that would leave them exposed to enemy fire. The southern route was more concealed but led toward known enemy positions. The western route offered the best cover, but ended at a cliff that would be impossible to descend quickly. Rivera decided they would try the northern route, gambling that speed and surprise would overcome the disadvantage of open ground. They would use the distress flares to create confusion just before making their move. Each team member would carry specific equipment and have designated responsibilities during the escape attempt. As they prepared to move, Rodriguez spotted movement on the opposite ridge. Enemy fighters were setting up what appeared to be a mortar position. If they got that weapon operational, it could rain explosive shells down on any position in the valley. The SEAL team would have to move before the mortar was ready to fire. Chen was adjusting her rifle scope when she noticed something that changed everything. A figure on the distant ridge was wearing different clothing than the other fighters and appeared to be directing their movements. Through her scope, she could see that this person was carrying sophisticated communications equipment and had the bearing of a professional soldier rather than a local insurgent. Rivera looked through his binoculars and confirmed Chen's observation. This was no ordinary ambush by local fighters. They were facing a coordinated operation led by someone with significant military training and experience. The level of planning and the quality of equipment suggested involvement by foreign military advisors or special forces from a hostile nation. Thompson intercepted a radio transmission that provided crucial intelligence. The enemy commander was planning to wait until the SEAL team attempted to escape, then trigger a coordinated attack from multiple positions. The goal was to capture at least one American alive for propaganda purposes. This information changed their tactical situation completely. The team realized they could not simply try to escape. They would have to eliminate key enemy positions to create a gap in the surrounding forces. This meant engaging in direct combat with a much larger enemy force, but it might be their only chance of survival. Rivera assigned targets to each team member based on their weapons and positions. Chen would take the sniper position on the ridge with her precision rifle. Thompson would provide covering fire and coordinate communications. Rodriguez would use his demolitions expertise to eliminate the mortar position. Rivera would lead the assault on the main enemy concentration. As they prepared for what might be their final battle, each team member checked their equipment one last time. Ammunition was distributed to ensure everyone had enough for a sustained firefight. Emergency medical supplies were positioned where they could be accessed quickly. The distress flares were prepared for immediate use. The attack began at exactly 1100 hours when Rivera fired the first distress flare, high into the clear mountain air. The bright red signal streaked upward, leaving a trail of smoke before bursting into a brilliant star that could be seen for miles. Within seconds, enemy fighters throughout the valley began shouting and pointing at the flare, exactly as Rivera had hoped. But the distraction lasted only moments before the enemy realized what was happening. Automatic weapons fire erupted from multiple positions as the insurgents began shooting at suspected SEAL locations. Bullets ricocheted off rocks and sent up small clouds of dust where they struck the ground. The sound of gunfire echoed off the valley walls, creating a deafening cacophony. Chen was already in position with her sniper rifle when the shooting started. From her elevated location, she had a clear view of the mortar crew that Rodriguez needed to eliminate. Through her scope, she could see 3 men frantically trying to get their weapon ready to fire. She took careful aim at the gunner and squeezed the trigger. The shot was perfect. The enemy gunner dropped immediately, and the other 2 men dove for cover behind their equipment. Rodriguez saw his opportunity and triggered one of his remotely detonated charges. The explosion destroyed the mortar and sent fragments flying in all directions. 2 enemy fighters were eliminated, and the threat from indirect fire was removed. Thompson was providing suppressing fire with his assault rifle, keeping enemy heads down while Rivera moved toward his assigned target. The technical vehicle with the heavy machine gun had begun firing, sending streams of tracers across the valley. The noise was incredible, and the bullets were impacting dangerously close to the SEAL positions. Rivera sprinted from rock to rock, using every bit of available cover as he worked his way toward the enemy vehicle. Bullets sparked off stones near his feet, and he could hear the angry buzz of rounds passing close to his head. His body armor felt heavy, but he knew it might be the only thing keeping him alive. When Rivera reached a position within grenade range of the technical vehicle, he pulled the pin and counted to 3 before throwing. The explosion disabled the vehicle and eliminated its crew, but it also revealed his position to other enemy fighters. Suddenly, multiple weapons were firing in his direction, forcing him to take cover behind a boulder. Chen was systematically engaging targets with her sniper rifle, making each shot count. Her training had taught her to remain calm under pressure, and she moved methodically from one target to another. Each time an enemy fighter exposed himself to shoot at her teammates, she was ready with a precisely aimed round. Rodriguez had moved to a new position and was preparing to detonate another charge when enemy fighters spotted him. A burst of automatic fire forced him to dive behind a fallen tree trunk. Splinters flew as bullets tore into the wood just inches from his head. He realized he was pinned down and would need help to continue his mission. Thompson saw Rodriguez's predicament and began laying down covering fire. His rifle chattered as he sent controlled bursts toward the enemy positions threatening his teammate. The covering fire was effective enough to allow Rodriguez to move to better cover, but it also drew enemy attention to Thompson's location. The firefight was intense, but brief. Within 10 minutes, the SEAL team had eliminated or suppressed most of the enemy positions in their immediate area. The disciplined fire and superior training of the Special Forces operators had overcome the numerical advantage of the insurgents. But Rivera knew this was just the beginning. Enemy reinforcements were already moving toward the sound of gunfire. Radio chatter indicated that additional fighters were being rushed to the area from other locations. The SEAL team had won the first engagement, but they would soon face a much larger enemy force if they remained in the valley. Rivera fired a second distress flare, this time toward the north where he hoped friendly forces might see it. The team had to move immediately before being surrounded again. They gathered their essential equipment and prepared to fight their way toward the extraction point that was still many miles away. As they began to move, Chen noticed something through her rifle scope that made her blood run cold. On a ridge nearly 1,000 meters away, a lone figure was setting up what appeared to be a large-caliber sniper rifle. The weapon had a sophisticated scope and bipod, suggesting this was no ordinary insurgent fighter. This was a professional sniper, and the SEAL team was about to face their most dangerous enemy yet. Chen immediately alerted Rivera to the sniper threat, speaking in urgent whispers over their radio system. The enemy marksman was positioned on high ground with an excellent field of view across the entire valley. From that location, he could engage targets at extreme range while remaining relatively safe from return fire. This single shooter could pin down the entire SEAL team and prevent their escape. Rivera studied the enemy sniper's position through his binoculars. The shooter had chosen his location well, with good concealment and multiple escape routes. The range was at the very limit of effective rifle fire, making a successful engagement extremely difficult, but leaving the sniper in position would be suicide for the team. The enemy marksman began his deadly work almost immediately. His first shot struck a rock just 2 feet from Thompson's head, sending fragments flying and demonstrating the accuracy of both the shooter and his weapon. The distinctive crack of a high-powered rifle echoed across the valley, followed by the delayed sound of the muzzle blast from the distant ridge. Thompson rolled behind better cover as the second shot impacted exactly where he had been lying moments before. The enemy sniper was not just accurate, but was also leading his moving targets correctly. This level of marksmanship suggested professional military training, possibly from a special forces unit of a hostile nation. Chen realized she was the only team member with the equipment and training necessary to engage the enemy sniper effectively. Her rifle was capable of accurate fire at the required range, and her scope was powerful enough to identify targets at that distance. But taking on an enemy sniper in a long-range duel was one of the most dangerous challenges a marksman could face. Rivera and Rodriguez began moving toward new positions, drawing the enemy sniper's attention and hopefully giving Chen the opportunity she needed. The enemy marksman shifted his aim to track their movement, and his third shot nearly caught Rodriguez as he sprinted between boulders. The bullet struck the ground so close that dirt and rock fragments peppered his legs. Chen found a stable shooting position and began studying the enemy sniper through her scope. She could see muzzle flashes when he fired, but the shooter himself remained well concealed. Patient observation would be required to identify a target worth engaging. She controlled her breathing and waited for the right moment. The enemy sniper's fourth shot was aimed at Rivera, who was attempting to reach a position where he could coordinate the team's next move. The bullet passed so close to Rivera's head that he felt the pressure wave and heard the distinctive snap of a supersonic projectile. He dove for cover, realizing how close he had come to death. Thompson was working frantically to re-establish communication with headquarters when the fifth enemy shot shattered his radio antenna. The bullet had missed his head by inches, and the destroyed equipment meant the team was now completely cut off from outside support. They were on their own against increasingly desperate odds. Chen had been watching patiently for several minutes when she finally saw what she was looking for. The enemy sniper had shifted position slightly, and a small portion of his body was visible behind his rifle scope. It was not much of a target, but it was enough for a shooter of Chen's skill level. She made careful adjustments to her scope and prepared for the most important shot of her life. The enemy marksman was lining up another shot when Chen fired. Her bullet traveled across nearly 1,000 meters of mountain air before finding its target. The enemy sniper jerked backward and disappeared from view, his rifle clattering down the rocky slope. Chen had eliminated the threat with a single, perfectly placed round. Rivera immediately ordered the team to move while they had the opportunity. The elimination of the enemy sniper had removed the immediate threat, but other enemy forces were still converging on their position. They had perhaps 30 minutes before being surrounded again by a much larger force. As the team gathered their essential equipment and prepared to move, Rodriguez reported that he had spotted enemy vehicles approaching from the south. The insurgents were bringing in reinforcements and heavy weapons, determined to prevent the Americans from escaping. The next phase of their survival would require speed, stealth, and probably more fighting. Chen took one last look through her scope at the ridge where the enemy sniper had been positioned. The threat was eliminated, but she knew there would be others. The team's fight for survival was far from over, and the most dangerous part of their journey still lay ahead. They had won this engagement, but the war would continue until they reached safety. The SEAL team moved swiftly through the rocky terrain, using every available piece of cover as they worked their way toward the extraction point. Chen's elimination of the enemy sniper had bought them precious time, but Rivera knew that enemy reinforcements would soon close off their escape routes. The sound of vehicle engines in the distance indicated that their pursuers were using trucks to move fighters into blocking positions. Rodriguez led the way, using his knowledge of demolitions to identify the safest paths through areas that might be mined or booby-trapped. His trained eye spotted several locations where the enemy had placed improvised explosive devices, and he carefully guided the team around these deadly obstacles. Without his expertise, they would have walked into a trap that could have eliminated the entire team. Thompson had salvaged what he could from his damaged radio equipment and was attempting to signal their location to any friendly forces that might be monitoring emergency frequencies. Although his main radio was destroyed, he had a backup emergency beacon that might be picked up by aircraft or satellites. Every few minutes, he transmitted their position and status, hoping someone would hear their calls for help. The team had been moving for nearly 2 hours when Chen spotted enemy vehicles on the valley floor below their position. Through her rifle scope, she could see trucks loaded with armed fighters spreading out to search the area. The enemy was conducting a systematic sweep, checking every possible hiding place where the Americans might have taken cover. Rivera called for a halt while they assessed the situation. They were trapped on the mountainside with enemy forces below and more troops moving to surround them from above. The extraction point was still 8 miles away through terrain that was becoming more dangerous with each passing hour. They needed a new plan if they were going to survive. Rodriguez suggested using the remaining explosive charges to create a rock slide that would block the road and delay the enemy vehicles. The plan was risky because the explosion would reveal their exact location, but it might buy enough time to reach better defensive positions. Rivera approved the plan, knowing they had few alternatives left. The demolition was perfectly executed. Rodriguez triggered the charges just as the lead enemy vehicle was passing beneath a section of unstable rock face. The explosion brought down tons of stone and debris, completely blocking the road and destroying 2 trucks. Several enemy fighters were eliminated, and the rest were forced to continue their pursuit on foot. But the explosion had also attracted attention from enemy forces in other areas. Within minutes, the team could see additional groups of fighters converging on their location from multiple directions. The trap was closing again, and this time there might be no escape. Rivera realized they would have to make a stand and fight with everything they had. Chen found a position that gave her a commanding view of the approaches to their location. Her sniper rifle had only a few rounds remaining, but she was determined to make each shot count. Through her scope, she began identifying targets among the enemy forces moving up the mountain slopes toward their position. Thompson had been monitoring enemy radio frequencies when he heard something that gave the team new hope. A coalition helicopter had picked up his emergency beacon signals and was attempting to reach their location. The aircraft was still more than an hour away, but it represented their first real chance of rescue. Since the mission had begun, Rivera organized the team's final defensive position among a cluster of large boulders that provided good protection from enemy fire. They arranged their remaining ammunition and equipment for easy access during what would likely be a prolonged firefight. Each team member understood that they needed to hold their position until the rescue helicopter could reach them. The final battle began just as the sun was setting behind the mountain peaks. Enemy fighters attacked from 3 directions simultaneously, using automatic weapons and rocket-propelled grenades to try to overwhelm the SEAL position. The sound of gunfire echoed off the rocky walls as tracer rounds streaked through the growing darkness. Chen's rifle spoke methodically as she engaged target after target with deadly precision. Her 5 remaining rounds eliminated 5 enemy fighters, including a team leader who was attempting to coordinate the assault. Each shot was perfectly placed, demonstrating the skill that had made her one of the Navy's finest marksmen. The firefight continued for nearly an hour before the sound of helicopter rotors could be heard approaching from the north. The rescue aircraft arrived just as the SEAL team's ammunition was running critically low. Covering fire from the helicopter's door gunners forced the enemy fighters to take cover, allowing the Americans to be extracted safely. As the helicopter lifted off and carried them to safety, Rivera looked back at the mountain valley where they had fought for their lives. The mission to capture Ahmed Hassan had failed, but something more important had been accomplished. 4 American warriors had faced impossible odds and survived through skill, courage, and teamwork. They had proven once again that the Brotherhood of Special Forces operators could overcome any challenge when they stood together.